gentlemen, it's time to rise and freedom. All right, one of my favorite guests is coming on today. His name is Tony Lovasco. He's a state representative here from the state of Missouri. He's joining us now. Good morning, Tony. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. Good to see you.
Morning, Austin.
I thought this was a good topic because people were quite triggered yesterday when we were talking about this concept of pandemic amnesty, not just triggered by the fact that the left has done so many evils in the name of trying to help us, right? Trying to do good. So many horrible, awful things that the left has done during the pandemic the last 2 years. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, let's just call a truce. So, I mean, I totally understand why so many of our Republican, Libertarian, and conservative friends want to go scorched earth on them and destroy them. But there were a lot of Republicans in the very beginning who gave in to pandemic tyranny and shutdowns and lockdowns and mandates and things like that. So if there's any amnesty to be going around, maybe we should have some apologies from our conservative friends who caved in the beginning too. What do you think?
Well, sure. I will say this. I'm not a big fan of amnesty in general here, but I would say there is room for nuance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was you or someone else that, likened this concept to, a Nuremberg 2.0. Right. And I think it's a good analogy. I don't think it necessarily serves anybody to hunt down the 97-year-old dude that cut the grass at the concentration camp and throw him in prison for the last 2 years of his life. But I got to tell you, if you were part of the machine and committing atrocities, yeah, you know what? You should have some consequences. And I think it's the same thing. I don't know that we need to, throw Gavin Newsom's secretary in prison. But if you used your office to trample people's rights, if you exceeded your authority under the law and you hurt people, I do think there should be consequences, whether that be a civil or criminal penalty, determines on the circumstances. Should we be, purging social media of random trolls who cheerleaded the administration? No, we don't have time for that. There's a lot of idiots who, bought the line and participated in kind of the mob. But, average everyday people who were just idiots about it aren't necessarily the people that I think we should be going after. That, but absolutely, as you pointed out, I think this, cuts both ways. Plenty of Republican governors locked down their states, and I think they should have consequences too.
Yeah, amen. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking to State Representative from Missouri, Tony Lovasco, talking about the left calling for a pandemic amnesty. See, I kind of saw this as a good sign, Tony, because it showed that the left felt that they had made mistakes. Like the woman who wrote the article talked about, the educational system and, Randy Weingarten and others, how she should be forgiven for locking down schools and keeping kids out of schools. But I'm kind of like with you on that one, right? Not so fast here. There are people who definitely made mistakes that they should be punished for because, why should we give them amnesty because they were wrong? I mean, we saw from the very beginning that this was a mistake. We knew from the very beginning that COVID wasn't dangerous to kids, that schools were not the vectors for transmission. So, not everybody should, get a sense of amnesty. And there are certainly people who need to be punished. What do you think should happen to Randy Weingarten or people like Tony Fauci? I mean, it's not like they're elected officials. We can't just throw them out of office.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction here. We need to not be participating in the conservative version of cancel culture. The fact that somebody ran their mouth and other people that did have power listened to them and abused your rights is not the same as they themselves abusing your rights. You have to look at it directly. There's a lot of people that were very guilty of making this worse. They were inspiring and in a lot of cases egging on the folks that had the power to hurt people. But just being a pundit, just being an advisor, Anthony Fauci is entitled to have wrong opinions. And, while, yes, we might look at him lying in front of Congress or other things as potentially criminal violations, and I think we should look at that, the scope of his guilt is different than the person who signs the executive order, who actually, sends the health inspector to go and close the business, et cetera, et cetera. When we have to look at all those things in context. But I think really what we ought to be looking at when it comes to, the moral side of things, whether or not, your aunt that didn't, let your kids come to the Thanksgiving because they weren't vaccinated or whatever, should be forgiven on a personal level. I think that's no different than anything else that we give forgiveness for in our lives. And you have to have some contrition. It's a huge, huge difference to say, you know what, I was wrong to do the thing. It's another thing to say, well, I shouldn't have done the thing because in retrospect, I was incorrect about my reasoning, right? A lot of these apologies that we've seen or pseudo kind of contritions, including the article that you cited originally, basically said, well, we didn't know that it wasn't going to work. We didn't know that it wasn't as bad in this area as we thought. And the implication there is, well, if it had been as bad and if it had worked, we still would have been correct. And that's where they lose me. Because in my mind, it doesn't matter if it works or not. You can't trample someone's rights. You can't lock them in their home. You can't shut down their business on private property just because of some utilitarian arguments that, well, it's going to help more people in the greater good. I mean, that's how all atrocities are justified. And it's totally different if someone is saying, look, I was completely wrong about my involvement in shutting down those businesses. It was never justified. I got caught up in it, and I didn't realize how evil I was being. Like, okay, I'll listen to that. It's another thing to say, well, it's a shame it didn't work. Sorry I hurt you guys.
One of our listeners sent us a message, which I think makes a lot of sense. Andy Opperman this morning said that for those who made the best decision with the information they had at the time and changed that position when they had better information, I have no trouble forgiving. For those who didn't or doubled down on bad policy for political reasons, how can that be ignored? I think that makes really good sense. You can text us. You can text us too, like Andy did, at 573-319-1586. Tony, I'd like to move on a little bit to another topic we were talking about during the commercial break about the Libertarian candidate in Arizona deciding to endorse the Republican Party candidate. This has triggered a lot of libertarians who think that Blake Masters is an authoritarian. I mean, what's his name? Justin Amash, former Republican congressman, now Libertarian Party member, is out there saying that Blake Masters is this authoritarian grifter. I mean, Congressman Ron Paul endorsed Blake Masters out in Arizona, and Dave Smith seems to have a high opinion of the guy. What do you think about when third-party candidates, libertarians, endorse Republicans like you?
Sure. I don't follow that race super closely. I don't have a strong opinion on Blake Masters, but as a general rule, I think that people of all parties need to actually use some common sense about what candidates are going to actually further their ideals and their political agenda and what ones are not. And I don't think it's a problem to endorse or consider the reality that perhaps someone in another party is in a better position to move the football down the field than you are. And I think that cuts both ways. The problem that I think a lot of people had with that situation is this kind of perception that the Libertarian Party's only function is to somehow try to claw their way up to parity with the Democrats and Republicans. And I think that's nonsense. I think that the Libertarian Party's function is presumably to promote liberty, right? It's right in the name. And if we're going to have any kind of reform in the, two-party system that is pretty well ingrained in most environments throughout the country, having a robust set of third parties that add to the dialogue and put people on notice that, if you're going to nominate bad candidates, there is going to be competition. I think that's positive across the board. I mean, it's competition, right? Republicans should not fear third parties. However, at the same time, if you've got a race that's, polling within half of 1% and the person getting the half of 1% drops out and endorses one of the two people, that does seem like somewhat common sense that, this guy was not going to somehow come from behind and win that Senate seat. And what he did was he made a very bold and honestly a very principled stance that his personal ambition was, takes a second place to, picking the best candidate of the available field. And maybe this Masters guy isn't that amazing. Maybe he is. I don't know. But he's almost certainly going to be better than the Democrats. So, why on earth wouldn't you at least consider that as a viable option?
That's quite a pragmatic view from Tony Lovasco. Tony, it would be like if a libertarian candidate were running in your race against you and the Democrat and trying to paint you as just some, insider Republican, just like the Democrat. I mean, if there was a libertarian in that race, you damn right that I would be putting a lot of pressure on that guy to drop out and endorse you because, you're pretty much the most libertarian Republican that we have. But unfortunately, I think what happens is that libertarians who are party members will, because of the party mentality, they get caught up in the same kind of partisanship that Democrats and Republicans do, and they put their party over their principles to a certain degree. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think that works the other way around. If all of a sudden Ron Paul moved to District 64 and decided to, run as a libertarian against me next term because I took a bad vote or something, I'm going to look at the polls and I'm probably not going to beat Ron Paul, and he's a pretty great guy. So maybe I ought to sit this one out. Like, the point of being involved in politics is not to, get your name on the door. The point is to move the football and advance the agendas that you care about. And libertarians and libertarian Republicans and whatever labels we want to put on folks, if you're fighting for liberty, the goal should be liberty. And that's it. And you use whatever tools you got to make that happen.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking to Missouri State Representative Tony Lovasco. You can send us a text, 573-319-1586. Tony, how do you feel about the upcoming midterm elections? You think it'll be what Joe Rogan said? He said it'd be like that elevator scene from The Shining, or Red Wave, just bleeding out all over the country. What do you think, Tony? You feel optimistic?
I am optimistic. I don't think it's going to be quite that exciting. I think we're going to definitely take back the House. I think there's a very good chance we'll make the Senate by maybe a vote or two. I think it's going to be a good day for sure. I think the real question is going to be how do we move forward? My biggest concern is us winning by a small margin. I would rather see us take the House by a huge amount and lose the Senate than take both houses by like 2 or 3 votes. Because ultimately what's going to happen is the Biden administration is going to put pressure on a handful of wishy-washy folks to switch their votes and vote with the Democrats. And Biden's still going to get what he wants, except for now they can say it's bipartisan. And that doesn't advance liberty at all either. I would like us to see us hold the line somewhere, whether it would be, in the Senate or the House. I think I'd probably prefer the Senate, but I don't think that's a strong preference. The real thing is we have to make sure that at least for the next 2 years, we can stop the train moving forward to making things worse and worse here in this country.
How do you feel about your race, Tony?
Well, considering I'm unopposed, I'm pretty good. I just got to make sure to vote for myself, and I'll be good.
State Representative Tony Lovasco from the state of Missouri. We appreciate you very much, Tony. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Austin.
Must be nice. Run out unopposed.